Oh, and one other thing, I added the recording for yesterday's lecture to the whiteboard under the schedule tab. So next to each day, I'll be adding the link to the recording of the lecture as well as the link to the slides. Can I get B's or P's that y'all can see the slide? Cool, thank you. All right, so if else in control flow, the idea of control flow is that you're using logic to control which lines of code in your program get executed. We talked about Booleans a little bit yesterday. A Boolean is one of the primitive data types in JavaScript, and you have true or false. But outside of just true and false by themselves, different values can have what are called truthy or falsy values. So essentially, different expressions that are not true or false, but might be a mathematical expression or a string or any other type of valid JavaScript expression will equate to true or false. An expression is a series of values, variables, and operators that, when interpreted, return a value. So 2 plus 3 will evaluate to 5. And we can use operators to create expressions, to kind of string expressions together. We talked about these a little bit yesterday. We have the greater than operator, the less than operator, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. And those all behave pretty much as you would expect. With the equality operators, there's a little bit more subtlety that we'll go into. And there's actually 4 different types of equality operators. There's triple equal, which is, well, we'll get into it in a second. Cool. So these are all examples of expressions. And as you can see, is 10 greater than 2? It is. So that would equate to true. That would result in a truthy value. Similarly, if you said 10 is less than 2, that's going to return a falsy value. So I'll let y'all kind of look down this list and see how these expressions work. Let's see. So the last 3 are where we get into some of the subtleties of the equality operators. You'll see that the number 5 is equal to the number 5. And if you say, so putting the exclamation mark in front of the equality operator will essentially saying 5 is not equal to 5. You use that exclamation mark to indicate a negated value. So that, again, produces what we would expect. The number 5 is equal to the number 5, so that expression would return false. Now, this last one returns false because the number 5 is not exactly equal to the string 5. But, well, so why is this false? There's another operator called type of. Type of is an operator which can tell us what type the value that we're looking at is. So type of the string hello will return string. Type of true will return Boolean. Type of 5 will return number. And then stringifying that 5 will return string. So that's why the number 5 and the string 5 will not exactly equal each other. Another thing is that that triple equals operator is case sensitive. So you'll notice if we capitalize the first letter of hello in one instance but not in the other, then they won't return exactly the same. So outside of the triple equals, there's another operator for looking at a different type of equality, and that would be the double equals. And that returns true. And it's actually, I'm going to jump over to the console just to demonstrate that works. So let's see, if we say 5 equals the string 5, using the double equals, that console logs to true. But if we set it to the triple equals, it's going to equate to false. And this is because of a rule of JavaScript called type coercion. In general, you want to use the triple equals. Almost always, unless you have a really good reason to use the double equals, you should default to using the triple equals. Triple equals checks to make sure that the data types match, but double equals will coerce the data types. It's essentially the computer, when you use the double equals, your computer is saying, you know, I think that you're actually, when you stringify this 5, you're actually meaning to put a number 5 in there because those are really close, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn it into that number for you. Let's see. So before I move on, are there any questions on operators or how type coercion works? Okay, cool. All right. Conditional statements. If, else, and else if are logical statements that make up conditional code blocks. If you haven't encountered these before, that probably isn't going to make a whole lot of sense, but we'll return to the slide once we've seen some code. So if works somewhat in the way that you would expect it to, if this condition between the condition between the parentheses is true, then it will console log this is true. Yeah, as expected, this will log this is true. So when you create a conditional block, you have your conditional operator, in this case it's if, and then between parentheses you have the expression that you're writing, and if that expression equates to true, then that block will execute, and if it equates to false, then that block won't execute. As we see in the second example, if, and they just throw a false value in there, so it's going to return false, then that console log won't run. So if 5 triple equals 5, and we know that that returns true, then it's going to console log this is true, so this runs. Oh. But 2 doesn't exactly equal 5, so that second block won't execute. If the program were running through line by line executing, it would execute that first console log, it would keep running down, it would get to the second if, and it would say, if 2 equals 5, but since that returns false, it just skips over that code block and doesn't execute it at all. All right, so let's look at another example. We create a variable called skittle. We say if skittle triple equals the string red, then it will log this is my favorite flavor. Else it will log I hate this skittle. Now we haven't assigned the variable skittle to anything. Right now, if we just said, let's see, so if we console log skittle before we assign it to something, it's going to return undefined. So you'll notice with an if-else block, if the first block doesn't run, then, so if the if block doesn't run, then instead it will default to executing the else block. Oh, let's get rid of this first one. Cool. So you'll see that because it's not defined, it jumps down to the else block and skips executing line 5. If I assign Skittle to red before I get to that conditional block, does somebody want to take a guess at what's going to happen?
It's going to be inside the if block.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. So before I continue on to the next section, does anybody have any questions about if and else blocks? Cool. All righty. So nesting conditional statements. We can put if and else blocks inside other if and else blocks. So in this example, we declare the variable Skittle, and then we declare the variable am I hungry. And if Skittle is equal to red, then it continues on to the next conditional and says, if am I hungry equates to true, then it logs I'm going to eat this Skittle. And if it equates to false, then it logs I'm going to save this Skittle for later. So outside of your basic if and else statements, you can chain together multiple conditional statements using the else if. Else if statements let you test for multiple conditions. So if the variable money, the person that created this slide didn't test this code. Does anybody see why this might error out before we get to any of the conditionals?
Is it because it's a string and then a number?
String and then a number. No, it's actually not a string because it's not between quotation marks. Are you referring to money?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually not a string. Because there's no quotation marks around it, it's looking for a variable. And because we haven't declared a variable called money, it's going to throw a reference error. So let's see what that looks like. Reference error, Skittle is not defined. It's a little bit confusing that when we declare Skittle, then it logs as undefined. And yet the error message for reference error is that Skittle is not defined. But if you don't declare a variable, then it's essentially saying there's no place in memory that is attached to this word called Skittle. When we declare that variable on line 1, it creates a space in memory for that variable to exist. And then it knows where to look for that when we go to console log it. And when it looks at that variable right now doesn't point at any value. So it says, okay, the value is undefined, but I see that space in memory that you're trying to find. All right, so back to else if statements. Let's imagine that we've declared the variable money somewhere higher above. If money is less than 60, console log, you need more money. Else, if money is greater than or equal to 60, so what happens is if money is not less than 60, then it skips over that first block and then goes to the first else if and equates if money is larger to or equal than 60. Then console log, hooray, you have enough money to buy this mega pumpkin. Else, so if neither of those equate to true, it will default to the final else block. But we could continue to string along multiple else if blocks. You can attach as many conditions as you want. So let's imagine that for money we were trying to target different ranges. So we might say if money is, let's see, money is less than 10, we'll execute some code. Else, if money is less than 20, we'll execute some other code. Else, if money is less than 50, so in this example, if line 3 equates to true, it's going to execute whatever code we add to line 4, and then it's just going to exit the whole conditional statement. This is all seen as one really long expression. So when it finds that one of those things is true, it executes whatever that conditional is pointing to and jumps over all the rest. So it would skip down to line 12. But let's say that line 3 equated to false, but then line 5 equated to true. Then it would execute the code that we add to line 6, and then it would skip over the rest, again going down to line 12. So before we move on, are there any questions about nesting conditionals?
Just a quick one. To clarify on that bottom console log, since money being less than or equal to 60 prints the second line of code text, is the console log on the bottom for if money is declared but undefined? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it would reach that final conditional if money were undefined, or
Okay.
if money were not a number, so if it was a different data type.
Oh, okay, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. So the OR operator. The OR operator returns true if one or both expressions are true. Otherwise, it returns false. So we're going to have an expression on the left side and on the right side of the OR operator. And if either of those expressions is true, then the whole expression is going to return true. So in the first case, that would return true. In the second case, that would still return true. Actually, in the first case, what happens is it starts to look at the expression. It says, okay, I've got a truth value, and then I see a truthy value, and then I see the OR operator. So it doesn't even bother to equate the second half, because it already knows that it's found a true value, and it sees the OR operator, so it just returns a true value. The same thing happens in the second line. It finds true on the first side of the OR operator, and so when it hits the OR operator, it just returns true. In the final case, though, it sees a false value, and then it sees the OR operator, so it goes to the right side of the OR operator to check if that second expression will return true or false. And because they both return false, then the whole expression will return false. And we can use these logical operators inside of conditionals, again, to control the flow of our program. So we declare a variable x and set it equal to 10. And we say if x exactly equals 9, or if x exactly equals 10, then log this will run. And because x equals, so it looks at the first side of the expression and says, well, x doesn't equal 9, so let's go ahead and check the second side of the OR operator. And when it sees a truthy value on the right-hand side, then it executes, well, it returns true from that entire expression and makes the conditional block execute. The AND operator. So the AND operator returns true only if both expressions are true. Otherwise, it returns false. So this time,
Hello, I'm fine.
I think somebody may have their mic unmuted. Or is there a question? So this time, when it gets to the left-hand side, in the first example, when it gets to the left-hand side, it sees true. And then it sees the AND operator, so it says, well, I still need to go see if the other side of this expression is true. So it goes to the right-hand side and also finds a truthy value. So because both sides are true, it returns true. In the second example, it sees a false value, and then it gets to the AND operator, and it says, well, I already know that half of this expression is false. The left-hand side is false, so I don't even need to look at the second expression to know that the entire expression is just going to return false. And the same thing happens in the third example. And now our example with x is actually going to return false and won't run, because it says if x triple equals 9, and it says, oh, I know it doesn't. That part returns a false value. It hits the AND operator and says, well, because I know the left-hand side returns false, then I'm just going to return false from the whole expression. And so it skips over that conditional block. All right, the not operator. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. When you add the not operator, which is the exclamation, before a value, it reverses that value. So for instance, if you put the not value in front of true, it's going to return false. And similarly, if you put it in front of false, it will return true. Does anybody want to take a guess what will happen when I have two not operators like that?
It will return true.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. So the first few examples are some of what we already went through. You can negate Booleans. So let's look at this example where it says type coercion. This example returns true. The reason it does that is because strings, any string is considered a truthy value. So if we just console log type coercion the string, it's going to console log the string. But by adding the double exclamation in front of it, we are taking that string value and coercing it into a truthy or falsy value. So for instance, if we put one exclamation point, it returns false. Similarly, with numbers, any number above 0 is going to return a true value. 0 will return a false value. And negative numbers will return a true value. Essentially, it's indicating, because 0 indicates the computer sees it as kind of an absence of value. So it's similar to undefined. And that's a good example too, actually. Let's see what undefined returns. So undefined is a falsy value, and you'll see that it returns false, but the console log undefined, it's just going to console log out undefined. Oh. And then one last example, an empty string. Again, the computer sees it as an absence of value. So if we create a string that doesn't have anything inside of it, that's going to be a falsy value. All right. Last but certainly not least, the ternary operator. The ternary operator takes a condition, and if the condition is true, it goes to the first expression, and if the condition is false, it goes to the second expression. So let's go look at this in Sublime Text. Well, first off, I'm going to break down the syntax for the ternary operator. So on the left-hand side of the question mark, you have any JavaScript expression. So let's say that we say any JavaScript expression that returns a truthy or falsy value, I should say. So let's say 2 exactly equals 2. So that's going to equate to true. Because it equates to true, it will execute the code on the left-hand side of this colon. However, if the expression on the left-hand side of the question mark equates to false, it will execute the code on the right-hand side of the colon. So right now it's console logging true. If we instead created a false expression, then it would console log false. And this is often used as a way to select a value based on a condition. So let's say that, well, we'll jump back to their example. So variable can drink is equal to age is less than or equal to 21. And if that expression equates to true, then the variable can drink will be set to the string too young. But if that expression equates to false, the variable can drink will be set to old enough. Before we move on, are there any questions about any of the operators that we've just covered?
I have a quick question. How are the ternary operators different from the if-else kinds of statements? Because they both seem to be able to do conditions.
Yeah, they are used for similar things. With the if and else operators, we've been using somewhat simple examples, but usually when you're writing a program, you're actually going to have a lot of code inside of the if and else blocks, or at least you'll have more than a single line of code. Whereas with the ternary operator, you can really only fit, I guess there are ways that you could make it execute more lines of code on either side of the expression, but it would look, it would be very difficult to read. So part of it is readability. For instance, let's see. This line of code, you can look at it and know what it does, but it's a little bit easier to read and truer to, it sounds more like when you read it, it looks more like language, like English, if you write it out as an if-else statement. But additionally, let's say instead of console logging, got that in the wrong order. So yeah, these would produce the same results right now. But what if instead of console logging, we said, you know, if that equates to false, then, like let's take their example, var can drink. So that's setting a variable, but what if instead we wanted to, if they're too young, we want to create an alert message for the user, and then we want to redirect them to a different page, versus if they're old enough, we want to redirect them to a separate page and have a different alert message. So putting things inside of if-else, if-else blocks are usually more handy for the goals that you're trying to get at. Ternary is helpful for certain specific cases where you just need to either return or set a single value. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Are there, oh, let's see, I think we got some questions in the chat. So would you have to chain the ternary multiple times to simulate if-else statements? That's a good question. I don't know that I've ever tried that.
Yeah, Zan, I think I haven't tried it either, but I imagine readability would be a huge headache with something like that.
Yeah, because you would have like inside of here, you would have another ternary. Let's see. Oh. Yeah, I'm even having trouble figuring out where to put the parentheses. If you wanted to simulate an if-else if statement using ternary, it would look something like this, which, going to Jordan's point about readability, when you first encounter this, it's really difficult to figure out what's going on with this line of code. And readability is actually a really important part of coding, because when you're writing a program, usually, you might write a piece of code and you'll be coming back at some later date, months later, a year later, or other developers might have to come interact with it later on. So you want your code to be as transparent as possible. You want people to be able to read it and understand what's going on in the code. And that's why things like organizing it in a readable way and creating good variable names are very important. All right, let's see. Can you put multiple statements inside conditional blocks using the ternary operator? Patrick, can you elaborate on that question? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Okay. Let's see. It'll all be on one line, quite a headache. Yeah. Okay, cool. Are there any other questions? All right, cool. We will move on. So, pseudocode. What is pseudocode? Can I get B's and P's in the chat to see if y'all have heard of pseudocode or have any idea what it is? Sudoku, yeah. All right, cool. Looks like we have a split audience. As your code gets more complex, it's helpful to write out how you're going to approach solving a problem before you actually start writing code. So pseudocode often takes the form of comments that are structured in such a way so that when you're ready to code, you can simply start writing the code below those comments. And a good rule of thumb with pseudocode is that one line of pseudocode should exactly correspond to one line of actual code. So here they're pseudocoding out a problem to check for skittle color. So you might write, first I'll check if the color of the skittle is red. If it is red, then check if I'm hungry. If the color is not red, check to see if my sister is around. If she is, give her the skittle, else I'll throw it away. I'm gonna grab all of this. And we can see, I'm going to code this out, and you'll see that because this pseudocode is very clear and it corresponds to each line of pseudocode corresponds to only one line of code, it's going to be really easy to just jump right into coding it. And I'm going to make one slight edit. It's generally considered good practice to indent your pseudocode in the way you would with the code. So if skittle equals red, then check if I am hungry. So this should actually be, let's move this down. Should be in there. We'll log that out. If the color is not red, so that would indicate an else. Check to see if my sister is around. So I'm actually going to reorganize this a little bit. Else if, trying to think of an expression that would check if my sister is nearby. If, we'll say there's a variable called sister distance. That's how far away my sister is less than 5. Say it's 5 feet. Then we will give her the skittle. Cool. And then if neither of those things are true, we'll throw the skittle away. All right. So that's essentially what pseudocode is. Are there any questions on pseudocode before I move on? Also write sister equals true, else if sister equals true. Oh yeah, I think I did end up doing that, Cynthia. Maybe. Are there any questions about pseudocode? Jeff, do you have a question? Okay. All right, I'm going to move on then. The default operator. So you can use the OR operator to provide a fallback in case a particular value is undefined. For example, if we create a variable called number of legs, and we say number of legs equals, if that variable already has a value, then we're just going to say that it's equal to that value it already has. But if it doesn't have a value, then we're going to set that value equal to 2. So what would happen if this was the first time that we'd encountered number of legs in the program? Then we would say var number of legs equals, the computer would see, oh, this variable that I'm looking for is an undefined value at the moment. We've declared it on the left-hand side, so it won't give us a reference error, but we haven't set it to a value yet. So this is going to equate to false because it's undefined. And so it's going to jump to the other side of the OR operator and instead return 2. The guard operator. You can use the AND operator, which only reveals its second value if the first value is truthy. So we'll declare a variable called secret code. And we'll say that if admin is a truthy value, then secret code is going to equal admin. So if admin is a truthy value and the password is cheese, so presumably someone has typed in the password cheese, so they both have to be the admin and have typed in the password cheese, then the variable secret code will be set to true. Oh, I think it's at the end. It is indeed the end. All right. Cool. So are there any questions before we break off into groups to go work on either JavaScript in the DOM or the if and else exercises?
What if your partner is not here today?
Yeah, if your partner is not here today, or also we have one new person joining the course, so they won't have a partner. We all stick around in the Zoom when I let everyone else go, and then we can figure out, we can pair people up, or we can, if we have someone that doesn't have a partner and we don't have an extra pair, they can join another group. So yeah, just if you don't have a partner, stick around and we'll get that figured out.
I have a quick